Welcome to the Real News Network. I'm Jessel Noor in Baltimore. Major TV news outlets, CNN, ABC, NBC, Fox, CBS, are all coming under fire for agreeing to an off-the-record talk with President-elect Trump. The meeting was reportedly intended to help restore some normalcy in Trump's relationship with the media. He's not held a press conference for months and frequently threatens to sue outlets for critical reporting. Instead, the summit was a, quote, fucking firing squad. That's according to a source that spoke to the New York Post. Well, now joining us to discuss this is Eric Boehlert. Eric is a senior fellow at the liberal watchdog group Media Matters for America. Thanks so much for joining us, Eric.
Oh, my pleasure.
So this whole incident yesterday and then the cancellation and reinstatement of Trump's meeting with the New York Times Tuesday today has raised this question, which many have asked, and I'm going to ask you now. Has the media learned the lesson from this election campaign when dealing with Donald Trump?
Yeah, no. The simple answer, people are waiting for this mythical pivot, right? They kept waiting for Trump during the campaign to kind of shed his, wild rhetoric and become more serious and more engaged, and that never happened. I think some of the press still think this is an act. They still think he's just, catering to the base. And, by the time he's inaugurated, he'll be like Mitt Romney, but with a different name, or he'll be like John McCain. None of that stuff is ever going to happen. Who he was in the campaign is who he's going to be as president. And in terms of the press, the way he dealt with the press, the way he undermined the press, the way he smeared and attacked the press during the campaign is what he's going to do as president. And, he's completely bullied them. He bullied them into submission, I would argue, during the campaign. And 2 weeks since the election, that's certainly the indication that he's going to do the same again. I mean, the TV executives yesterday going to meet with Trump off the record, that in and of itself isn't the worst thing, but you don't go have an off the record, conference with the president-elect when he has refused to, have a press conference since July. He's putting out, Monday night, he put out a YouTube statement about his first day in office, right? So, we have reporters reduced to transcribing YouTube videos to try to give news consumers some insight into what President Trump is going to be like. So, from what I can tell, they haven't learned any lessons. They're lowering the bar for him. I saw a couple people on, journalists on Twitter today saying, well, Trump deserves credit for going to the New York Times and answering questions. To me, that's kind of the minimal responsibility for any president.
Writing in The Intercept, Glenn Greenwald wrote today, quote, why would journalistic organizations agree to keep their meeting with Donald Trump off the record? If you're a journalist, what is the point of speaking with a powerful politician if you agree in advance it's going to be kept all secret? Do they not care what appearance this creates? The most powerful media organizations meeting high atop Trump Tower with the country's most powerful political official, with everyone agreeing to keep it all a big secret from the public. What are your thoughts on that? It doesn't look well for the press. It looks like they're trying to just buy favor with him, and it all sort of backfired. And the New York Post had that headline I read earlier. It seemed like he used the opportunity just to sort of put them in their place and just to scold them like they're misbehaving school children.
Yeah, they walked right into a trap, right? These are supposed to be the best and the brightest, the most elite in the television news business, and they walked right into this trap. He said, let's have an off-the-record conversation, and they said, okay. Again, not unprecedented. There's a tradition, the day of the State of the Union, maybe the day before, all the television news anchors go to the White House and have an off-the-record conversation with the president. We've seen this before. But again, you can't have an off-the-record conversation with the president-elect when he has, up till now, refused to have any interaction with the press. It looks like you're groveling, you're begging for some kind of access. But again, they walked right into this trap, so they say, we'll have an off-the-record conversation. Within 10 minutes of the meeting being over, someone from the Trump team, leaks their version of the story to the New York Post, basically describes Trump as just berating them, calling them liars, putting them in their place. So now they look kind of weak, going to the Trump Tower to kind of kiss the ring, and then afterwards they look even weaker because it looks like Trump, just beat up on them for half an hour. So none of it worked out very well. Again, they kind of walked right into this trap. And that goes back to your first question. They didn't learn anything from Trump. Why would you trust him? Right? He has kind of exposed himself to be a pathological liar, does not adhere to the norms of kind of political behavior, media behavior. So why would you think, hey, let's go have an off-the-record conversation and not assume you're going to get burned in the end, which is exactly what happened.
And, Media Matters and yourself have been reporting on how the mainstream media helped fuel Trump's rise. And I know, at least one CNN executive, in hindsight, said, "Hey, maybe we shouldn't have been playing all his rallies and speeches unedited." But the focus they put on Trump over actual substance in the whole campaign, it doesn't seem like they're quite, learning from that either, and they're continue to focus on these sort of, what's happening with the cast of Hamilton and Trump attacking them for how they, treated the vice president elect, but not actually focusing on some of the terrifying policies and the people that he's associated himself with, out and out racist, xenophobes that he's filling his administration with.
Look, they're still grappling, right? They've been dealing with Trump for almost 18 months since he first, announced his candidacy. They still haven't figured out how to handle this guy. It took him a year really to call him a liar when again, all the fact checking showed that he was basically a pathological liar. Now they're kind of being overrun by all the people that he's nominating. Well, what do we call them? Is Steve Bannon, his chief advisor, this white nationalist? Well, the Washington Post headline said he promoted, quote, fiery populism. I don't think that comes anywhere near describing who Steve Bannon is and what the rise of the alt-right and white nationalism. And again, even something that might seem trivial, like the Hamilton, Mike Pence was booed. I saw 2 New York Times reporters go on Twitter and basically say, and you can't boo Mike Pence. That's rude. That's disrespectful. This is, Trump is basically declaring war on large portions of the American public. And we still have journalists saying, let's not be disrespectful. Let's not boo someone in public. Let's congratulate Trump for showing up to the New York Times and answering some questions for an hour. Again, we're kind of normalizing all of this stuff, and we're lowering the bar, and he hasn't even been inaugurated yet. And it's weird, right? Because, I could see maybe if Trump won this wild landslide victory, right? America, a 49 state victory like Reagan had or something. America spoke and just completely announced where we want to go as a country. Of course, Trump couldn't even win the popular vote. He's going to lose that by probably 2 or 3 million votes. His unfavorable rating is still underwater as a president-elect. President-elect Obama in November 2008 had a 70% favorable rating. People liked him. People always like whoever they just elected. Even if they don't vote for him, there's sort of a goodwill feeling. Trump's at 46% favorable rating. He hasn't even been inaugurated yet. So why is the press kind of, overwhelmed or being pushed around by this guy who barely even won the election? It's totally bizarre, but it ties into the whole campaign where I think Trump's bullying tactics are paying off yet again.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. Eric Boehlert, Senior Fellow at the watchdog group Media Matters for America. And I've got a feeling we're going to be having you and your colleagues on even more in the next upcoming weeks and months. Thanks so much for joining us.
My pleasure.
And thank you for joining us at the Real News Network.